My name is Cynthia. I am 35 years old. And for most of my adult life, I believed I was living a simple and happy story. I am married to Howard, a man I met when I was young and hopeful, when love felt easy and the future felt safe. He is 40 years old now, and we have been married for 10 years. When I think about those early years, I still remember how natural everything felt between us. We were not rich, and our lives were not perfect, but we were close in a way that made problems feel small. We talked about everything, even the little things that didn't matter much, like what to cook for dinner or which movie to watch on a quiet night. Howard used to make me laugh without trying. He would come home tired from work, but still ask about my day, listening carefully as if my words were important. On weekends, we would wake up late, share coffee at the kitchen table, and make plans that didn't need to be exciting to feel special. Sometimes we stayed home all day. Sometimes we went for long walks, holding hands like nothing in the world could pull us apart. I felt safe with him, and that feeling meant more to me than anything else. 7 years ago, our son Charlie was born, and our happiness seemed to grow even deeper. Howard was a loving father from the first day. He held Charlie gently, afraid even to breathe too loudly, and his eyes filled with pride every time Charlie smiled. Watching Howard become a father made me love him more. We were a team then. Nights were sleepless, days were exhausting, but we supported each other without complaint. If I was tired, Howard stepped in. If he felt overwhelmed, I was there. Our home felt warm, filled with small sounds of life and love. As Charlie grew older, our family routines became part of who we were. Breakfast together before school, quick kisses before work, stories before bedtime. Howard used to read to Charlie every night, changing his voice for different characters, making our son laugh until his eyes closed. I would stand quietly at the door, watching them, feeling grateful for the life we had built. I truly believed this was how things would always be. Looking back now, those memories feel almost too perfect, like scenes from another life. But at the time, I never questioned them. I trusted my marriage completely. I trusted Howard completely. I believed that 10 years together meant something unbreakable, something strong enough to survive anything that came our way. I thought love, once built carefully and honestly, could not simply fade. In those happy years, problems did come. Of course, money worries, work stress, small arguments that felt big in the moment. But we always talked. We always found our way back to each other, even when we disagreed. I never doubted his heart. Howard was my partner, my closest friend, the person I turned to when the world felt heavy. And I was his. That is why the change feels so painful now. When I think about how close we used to be, the distance hurts more. It is not just about missing laughter or conversations. It is about losing a feeling of belonging, a feeling of being chosen every day. Our happiness was not loud or dramatic, but it was real. It lived in small gestures, shared silence, and quiet understanding. I still remember one evening from years ago when the power went out during a storm. The house was dark, and Charlie was just a baby. Crying softly, Howard lit a few candles, held Charlie in his arms, and smiled at me like everything would be okay. In that moment, I felt completely sure of my life, my marriage, and my future. That certainty is what makes everything so confusing now. We used to be very close. We used to be happy. That truth stays with me, even as I try to understand what has changed. Those memories are not lies. They are proof that what we had was real. And that is what makes me hold on, hoping that somewhere beneath the silence and distance, the man I married is still there. At first, the changes in Howard were so small that I almost ignored them. Nothing happened suddenly. There was no single moment I could point to and say, this is when everything went wrong. It began quietly, in ways that were easy to explain and even easier to excuse. After all, we had been married for 10 years. Life was busy. Work was stressful. People changed. That was what I told myself. Howard started coming home later than usual. Not extremely late, just late enough to miss dinner. When I asked him about it, he said work had become more demanding. He looked tired, his shoulders heavy, his voice flat. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I warmed his food, kissed his cheek, and told him to rest. But something about the way he avoided my eyes made me uneasy, even though I couldn't explain why. Then he stopped talking as much. Howard had never been a very talkative man, but he used to share little stories from his day. Now, when I asked how work was going, his answers were short and closed. Fine. Busy. Same as always. Conversations that once flowed naturally began to feel forced, like I was pulling words from him instead of receiving them. Sometimes we sat at the table in silence, the sound of Charlie chewing his food louder than our voices. I noticed he spent more time on his phone. He would check it often, even during family time. If a message arrived, he would turn the screen away slightly, or step into another room to reply. Again, I told myself not to overthink it. Everyone used their phone too much these days. Still, a quiet tension began to grow inside me, a feeling that something was slowly slipping out of my reach. Howard also stopped laughing the way he used to. His smile felt distant, like it no longer belonged to me. When Charlie told him stories about school, Howard listened, but his mind seemed somewhere else. He nodded, said the right words, but the warmth was missing. Our son noticed it too. One night, Charlie asked me why Daddy seemed tired all the time. I didn't know how to answer, so I just hugged him and said everything was okay. Our evenings changed. We used to sit together after putting Charlie to bed, talking or watching something simple on television. Now Howard often said he needed to finish work or that he was too tired. He would sit in another room, the door half closed, creating a physical distance that felt much larger emotionally. I would lie in bed alone, listening to the quiet, wondering when I had started feeling lonely in my own marriage. The hardest part was that nothing felt dramatic enough to confront. There was no shouting, no clear argument, no obvious reason to accuse him of anything. And so I stayed silent. I watched. I waited. I tried to be patient, to be understanding. I reminded myself of the man I married, of the years we had shared, of the life we had built together. Surely this was just a phase. But deep down, a small fear began to take shape. I felt it when Howard forgot things he used to remember, like my favorite tea or the time Charlie's school ended. I felt it when his touch became rare, almost careful, as if he was afraid of closeness. I felt it when he stopped asking about my feelings altogether. Sometimes, late at night, I replayed our days in my mind, searching for a mistake I might have made. Had I changed? Had I stopped being enough for him? The questions came quietly, one after another, stealing my sleep. I didn't share these thoughts with anyone. I didn't want to worry my family. And I didn't want to face the possibility that my fears might be real. 3 or 4 months had passed like this. Slowly, painfully, the change was no longer invisible. It was there in our silence, in the space between us on the couch, in the way Howard kissed my forehead instead of my lips. I still loved him, but love alone no longer felt like enough to bring us back to where we were. Something was different. I could feel it every day. And even though I didn't yet know what it meant, I knew one thing for sure. Ignoring it would not make it disappear. Keynote 3, expand 700-word story of YouTube. As the days passed, the distance between Howard and me stopped feeling temporary and started feeling permanent. It wasn't just in the way he spoke or the hours he kept anymore. It was in the air of our home, a quiet heaviness that followed me from room to room. I could sense it the moment he walked through the door. Even before he said a word, I knew whether it was going to be another silent evening. I tried to talk to him, not in a dramatic way, not with accusations, but gently, the way two people who love each other should. I asked if he was okay, if something was bothering him, if work was really as stressful as he said. Each time, he smiled weakly and told me everything was fine. His answers sounded rehearsed, like he had practiced them in his head. I wanted to believe him, but my heart didn't listen. Loneliness is a strange feeling when you are married. I slept beside my husband every night, yet I felt more alone than I had ever felt before. We shared the same bed, but there was an invisible wall between us. Sometimes I reached for his hand, hoping for comfort, and he would squeeze it briefly, then let go. That small moment hurt more than a clear rejection. It felt like he was present only out of duty, not desire. During the day, I played my role as usual. I took care of Charlie, prepared meals, cleaned the house, smiled when needed. From the outside, our family probably looked normal, but inside, I was breaking in quiet ways. I missed being seen. I missed being heard. I missed the simple comfort of knowing my husband understood me without words. Charlie became more sensitive during this time. He watched us closely, his young eyes noticing things we thought he couldn't see. He asked fewer questions and spent more time alone with his toys. Once, I heard him tell his stuffed bear, in a soft voice, that Mommy was sad. That moment stayed with me, filling me with guilt and fear. I didn't want our silence to become his normal. At night, when the house was quiet, my thoughts became loud. I wondered if I had waited too long to speak up, if I had allowed the distance to grow by staying patient instead of being brave. I questioned myself constantly. Was I asking for too much? Was I imagining things? Or was I simply afraid of the answers I might receive if I pushed harder? There were moments when I felt angry, but even that emotion faded quickly into sadness. Anger would have meant there was still a connection, something strong enough to react. What I felt instead was a dull ache, a constant awareness of loss. I was grieving something that hadn't officially ended, and that made it harder to explain. Even to myself, I started avoiding moments that reminded me of what we used to be. I stopped watching old photos on my phone. I avoided our favorite places in the house. Even music that once made me happy now felt painful. Everything seemed to whisper reminders of a love that was slowly slipping away, and I didn't know how to hold on to it. Still, I didn't give up. Love, especially after 10 years, doesn't disappear easily. I held on to hope in small ways. I left notes for Howard, cooked his favorite meals, tried to create moments where we could reconnect. Sometimes he noticed, sometimes he smiled, but the closeness I was reaching for always felt just out of reach. The silence between us became a language of its own. It spoke of avoidance, fear, and unspoken truths. And every day, that silence grew heavier. I knew I couldn't continue living this way forever. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine while my heart was slowly wearing down. I was standing at the edge of something I didn't yet understand, torn between the woman I used to be and the woman I was becoming. One thing was clear, though, staying quiet was no longer protecting my marriage. It was slowly destroying me. The change in our home did not stay between Howard and me. Slowly, quietly, it reached Charlie too. Children feel things adults try to hide, and my son was no exception. He was only 7, but he sensed the tension the moment it became part of our daily life. The laughter that once filled our house had faded, replaced by careful voices and long silences. Even when Howard and I tried to act normal, Charlie could feel that something was wrong. Charlie used to be a cheerful child. He talked endlessly about school, his friends, and his dreams. He laughed easily and ran through the house without worry. But as the distance between his father and me grew, Charlie became quieter. He still smiled, but his smiles were shorter. Unsure, he watched us closely, as if he were trying to understand a puzzle too complicated for his young mind. One evening, as I helped him with his homework, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. He looked at me seriously and asked if Daddy was angry with him. My heart sank. I told him no, of course not, that his father loved him very much. But even as I spoke, I felt the weight of my own uncertainty. I realized then how deeply our situation was affecting him. Family routines began to change. Howard no longer read bedtime stories every night. Sometimes he was too tired. Sometimes he was busy. And sometimes he simply forgot. Charlie waited by his bedroom door, book in hand, hoping his father would come. When Howard didn't Charlie would quietly hand me the book instead. I read to him, holding back tears, wishing I could give him what he was missing. Meals together felt different too. We still sat at the same table, but the warmth was gone. Charlie tried to fill the silence with stories from school, but Howard's responses were distracted. I could see Charlie's excitement fade with each unanswered question. After dinner, he often went to his room alone, something he had never done before. I worried constantly about the example we were setting for him. I didn't want Charlie to grow up thinking that love meant silence or distance. I didn't want him to believe that this was what marriage looked like. At the same time, I didn't know how to protect him from a situation I barely understood myself. One night, after Charlie had fallen asleep, I stood outside his door and listened to his breathing. I felt overwhelmed with guilt. I wondered if staying in a broken emotional space was hurting him more than any truth ever could. I asked myself if my fear of confrontation was making him pay a price he didn't deserve. Charlie also began having trouble sleeping. He came into our room at night, saying he had bad dreams. I held him close while Howard slept, unaware or pretending not to notice. In those quiet moments, I felt a strong sense of responsibility. No matter what was happening in my marriage, I had to be strong for my son. At school, his teacher mentioned that Charlie seemed distracted and less confident. Hearing this confirmed what I already knew in my heart. Our family's emotional struggle was shaping his world. It was no longer just about my pain or Howard's distance. It was about the future of a child who depended on us both. I started making small changes to bring stability into Charlie's life. I spent more time talking to him, listening carefully, reassuring him whenever I could. I tried to create moments of happiness, even if they felt fragile. I wanted him to feel safe, loved, and supported, no matter what. The truth was painful but clear. The distance in my marriage was leaving marks on my son's heart. And as his mother, I knew I could no longer ignore it. Protecting Charlie meant facing the reality I had been avoiding. For the first time, I understood that my silence was not harmless. It was shaping the life of someone I loved more than anything. There came a moment when I realized I could not continue living between fear and hope. For months, I had been waiting for things to change on their own, convincing myself that patience would heal everything. But the silence had only grown heavier, and the distance had only become more real. One quiet evening, as I watched Howard sitting across from me, lost in his thoughts, I understood that waiting was no longer an option. I needed answers, even if they hurt. My heart was racing when I finally decided to speak. I chose my words carefully, afraid that one wrong sentence might push him further away. I told him how lonely I felt, how confused I was, and how much I missed the man he used to be. I didn't accuse him. I didn't raise my voice. I simply spoke the truth of my pain. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence between us felt unbearable, stretching far longer than any argument ever had. When Howard finally looked at me, his eyes were tired, filled with something I hadn't seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. He admitted that he had been struggling, that something inside him had changed, but he didn't know how to explain it. He said he felt lost, overwhelmed by expectations he didn't know how to meet. His distance, he claimed, was not about another person, but about his own confusion. I listened, trying to understand, even as part of me remained uncertain. His words answered some questions, but raised others. Still, it was the first honest conversation we had shared in months, and that alone felt like a small step forward. For the first time, I saw that his silence had not only been hurting me, but him as well. We talked late into the night, carefully uncovering feelings we had buried under routine and responsibility. We spoke about how life had slowly changed us, how stress and expectations had replaced joy without us noticing. It was painful to admit that love alone was not enough if we stopped nurturing it. That night, I cried more than I had in years, not just from sadness, but from release. Nothing was suddenly fixed after that conversation. The distance didn't disappear overnight, and trust didn't magically return. But something important shifted. The silence was broken. We agreed to try, truly try, to understand each other again. We talked about counseling, about spending intentional time together, about being more present as partners and parents. Most importantly, I decided to stop hiding my feelings. I promised myself that I would no longer shrink my pain to keep the peace. Loving someone did not mean losing my voice. I realized that my worth was not defined by whether my marriage survived, but by my honesty, my strength, and my ability to protect my own heart and my son's future. I also thought deeply about Charlie. No matter what happened between Howard and me, I wanted him to grow up seeing courage, communication, and respect. I wanted him to learn that facing the truth, even when it is difficult, is better than living in quiet suffering. As I stand here now, I don't know exactly what the future holds. Healing is not a straight path, and some wounds take time to close. But I know this. Choosing to face the truth was the first step toward reclaiming my life. Whether my marriage grows stronger or takes a different path, I am no longer living in the shadows of uncertainty. Sometimes, love means holding on. Sometimes, it means letting go of fear and choosing honesty. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is speak when silence feels safer.